I left for a business trip. Just 5 days. When I came back, my things were in garbage bags, and my old room was locked. We needed the space. Mom said. Dad told me to stop being dramatic. I didn't argue, I just walked out. 2 months later, they served me court papers. They were suing me. I was 17, the summer I came home. My name's Hannah Brooks. Though in my family, I was usually just the older one. The bus ride from the city had taken almost 5 hours. Each mile peeling away the noise of strangers and bringing back the quiet I remembered from childhood. My suitcase faded red with a stubborn wheel that squeaked every few steps thumped along behind me as I stepped onto the familiar cracked sidewalk of Maple Street. The air smelled the same, warm asphalt, cut grass, and a faint trace of the bakery 2 blocks over. Every tree along the road looked taller, older, like they'd been growing while I was gone. I slowed my steps, tracing the lines of each porch I used to pass on my way to school. The Wilkinsons still had that chipped blue mailbox. Mrs. Turner's roses still bloomed in neat rows along her fence. I told myself over and over, this time, it's going to be different. Maybe Mom and Dad would notice how much I'd grown, how much I'd managed on my own. Maybe they'd be proud. The thought of sitting down at our kitchen table again, hearing the clink of forks against plates, almost made me smile. My fingers tightened around the suitcase handle as I turned the last corner. There, it was our house. The same pale yellow siding, the same sagging front steps. My heart kicked up a little as I climbed them. Hearing the wood creak in all the familiar spots, I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The scent that met me wasn't what I expected. Not the warm smell of dinner on the stove. Not even the clean, sharp scent of lemon polish. It was cold, stale, the kind of smell a place gets when no one's been trying to make it feel alive. The hallway felt longer than I remembered. My footsteps echoed, and for a moment I wondered if I'd walked into the wrong house. I set my suitcase down by the wall, glancing toward the kitchen. No sound. No one there. I started toward my room, and my hand brushing the worn banister as I made my way upstairs. Every step seemed to take me further from that warm picture I'd painted on the bus ride home. I didn't know it yet, but in a few seconds, the meaning of home for me would never be the same again. At the top of the stairs, I turned right toward my bedroom, already picturing the comfort of my old quilt and the little bookshelf Dad built me when I was 10. The door was closed. For some reason, that struck me as odd. My parents never kept it shut. I twisted the knob and pushed it open. The air inside hit me first. It didn't smell like my room. No faint lavender from the candle I used to light. No trace of the old wooden dresser. Instead, the scent of Sophie's perfume floated in the air. Sweet and sharp. I blinked, taking in the sight in front of me. Everything I owned was gone. The bedspread was floral. Not the faded blue one I'd had for years. My posters were missing, replaced with Sophie's framed photos. Her clothes hung neatly in the closet where mine used to be. The bookshelf was empty. For a moment, and my mind tried to rationalize it. Maybe they'd moved things while I was away to fix something. Maybe there'd been a leak. Or they were painting. But deep down, I knew better. I heard footsteps behind me and turned to see my mother standing in the doorway. Her arms crossed. You're almost an adult. Hannah, don't be selfish. Sophie needs more space now. Hi. Her voice was flat, as if this were the most reasonable thing in the world. Before I could respond, my father appeared behind her, resting a hand on her shoulder. You'll manage. You're old enough to figure things out. Hi. I looked from one to the other, my mouth opening, then closing again. What was I supposed to say? That I'd been counting down the days to come home? That I'd thought maybe, just maybe, I'd be welcomed back? The words stuck in my throat. I swallowed hard, feeling my chest tighten. My gaze drifted to the floor, then back up at them. Slowly, I stepped past my mother, walked down the stairs, and into the kitchen. I placed my house key on the table, the soft clink sounding louder than it should have in the empty room. Neither of them said a word. I turned once at the doorway. They were both standing in the hall, watching me, their faces unreadable. In that moment, something inside me shifted. It wasn't anger. Not yet. It was clarity. As I stepped outside, the late afternoon air felt cooler, sharper. I walked down the front steps and didn't look back. In that moment, I knew I didn't have a place in my own family anymore. I don't remember the first time I realized I wasn't my parents' favorite. Maybe it was something I felt before I could name it, like a draft that slips under the door. But I do remember the day it became undeniable. I was 8 years old, standing in our kitchen, clutching a certificate from the county art fair. It had my name printed in bold letters and a shiny gold sticker in the corner. I'd worked on that painting for weeks, bright sunflowers in a blue vase. The vase had been tricky. I'd erased and repainted it so many times the paper had started to fray. When I handed it to my mom, I expected, I don't know, maybe a hug, at least a smile. She looked at it, nodded once, and said, "Not bad, but you could have done better." Then she set it on the counter without another word and went back to stirring a pot of soup. I remember staring at the steam curling up from the pot, thinking maybe she hadn't understood that I'd won first place. Maybe she thought it was just a participation ribbon. I opened my mouth to explain, but before I could, the front door swung open and Sophie's voice rang out. She was 6 then, 2 years younger, and she burst into the kitchen, holding a small silver trophy. "I got 2nd place in the school singing contest," she squealed. Mom's eyes lit up like Christmas morning. She wiped her hands on a towel, bent down, and wrapped Sophie in a hug so tight I could hear the air leave her lungs. "Oh, sweetheart, that's amazing. Let me see it." 4. Dad came in behind her, grinning from ear to ear. He pulled out his phone to take pictures while Mom fetched the special plate of cookies from the cabinet. They posed Sophie in the best light, snapping shot after shot, the silver trophy catching the sun. I stood there, holding my certificate, which suddenly felt heavy in my hands. No one asked to see it. No one took my picture. After a while, I set it down on the counter next to the soup pot. From the living room, I could hear them laughing, the sound of Sophie singing a few bars of her winning song. I told myself I was happy for her, that I should be happy for her. But deep down, something small and fragile cracked. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the gold sticker from my certificate glinting faintly in the moonlight where it sat on my dresser. It wasn't that I wanted Sophie to have less. I just wanted a little more for myself, a little more of their eyes on me, their voices calling me amazing, their arms wrapping me up like I was the best thing that had ever happened to them. It was the first time I realized that love in our house wasn't evenly divided. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. By the time I was 13, I'd learned not to wait for someone to notice I was hungry. Most evenings, Mom and Dad were busy shuttling Sophie to rehearsals, practices, or whatever new hobby had captured her attention that month. I'd come home from school, drop my bag in my room, and head straight to the kitchen. Sometimes I'd boil pasta and stir in a jar of sauce. Other nights I'd make grilled cheese or heat up a can of soup. I didn't mind cooking. Really, what I minded was how, on the nights Sophie was home, Mom always seemed to have the energy to make her favorite meals: lasagna with garlic bread, chicken pot pie, strawberry shortcake for dessert. On those nights, I'd wait until everyone had eaten. Then I'd scrape whatever was left into a plate for myself. The food was fine. It was the quiet that got to me. Eating alone at the kitchen table, while voices and laughter drifted in from the living room felt like pressing my nose against a window from the outside. When I turned 15, I told myself not to expect much for my birthday. We didn't make a big deal out of mine. Still, our part of me hoped just maybe that year would be different. That morning, Mom slid a plain envelope across the table. Inside was a card with a stock photo of balloons on the front and a line in her handwriting that read, "Happy birthday, Hannah. Love. Mom and Dad." No cake. No gift. No hug. The following month, when Sophie turned 13, the house was strung with streamers. There was a towering chocolate cake, a new guitar leaning against the wall, and 20 people packed into our living room. Dad gave a toast about how proud they were of her. Mom cried when Sophie strummed her first song. I clapped along with everyone else. But I felt myself shrinking, like my chair was sinking into the floor. It wasn't just the birthdays. It was the 100 little moments that told me I was more of an afterthought than a priority, the empty seats at my school art shows, the way my report cards were skimmed instead of praised, how nobody seemed to remember my favorite color. By then, the feeling that I didn't belong in my own family had settled deep in my chest. I didn't say it out loud, but I carried it everywhere, like a stone in my pocket, and sometimes, when I was lying awake at night, I'd catch myself imagining what it would be like to live somewhere else. Not just visiting, really living. Somewhere I wasn't competing for affection. Somewhere I didn't have to earn a place at the table. I didn't know it yet. But that thought, quiet and almost shameful, was the first step toward the day I'd finally walk away. The first few nights after leaving home blurred together. I crashed on a friend's couch, my backpack doubling as a pillow, my jacket as a blanket. Every creak of the old apartment building made me jump, and every morning I woke with a knot in my neck and a deeper ache in my chest. I told myself it was temporary, that I'd figure something out soon. But the truth was, I had no plan, just a stubborn refusal to go back. Money disappeared faster than I expected. A couple of shifts at the diner barely covered bus fare and the cheapest food I could find. I learned which convenience stores didn't mind if you lingered inside to warm up, and which streets stayed lit enough at night to feel safe walking. My days revolved around survival, not dreams. One rainy evening, I ducked into a rundown coffee shop to escape the downpour. The place smelled faintly of burnt beans, and the heater rattled like it was on its last leg. I slid into a corner booth, counted the coins in my palm, and realized I didn't have enough for both coffee and dinner. I bought the coffee anyway. It was hot, and I needed the warmth more than the calories. I sat there, watching water streak the windows, wondering how long I could keep this up. My phone buzzed on the table, and I nearly ignored it. I didn't want to explain to anyone where I was or why. But when I saw the name, my chest tightened. Evelyn, my grandmother. I answered, trying to sound steady. "Hey, Grandma." Huh. Her voice was warm but laced with worry. "Sweetheart, I heard you're not at home anymore." Huh. I swallowed. "Yeah, I'm figuring things out." Huh. There was a pause. Then she said firmly, "No, you're coming to stay with me. You don't belong out there alone." Huh. Something in me cracked at her words. I bit my lip hard, fighting the rush of emotion. She didn't ask for explanations or choose sides. She just opened a door. I took the bus to her house that night. She was waiting at the top of the porch steps, arms outstretched. When she hugged me, I felt the weight I'd been carrying loosen just enough for me to breathe. "I've always seen you for who you are," she whispered into my hair, and I believed her. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt safe, not because the world had changed, but because someone had given me a place in it. That night, I slept in a real bed, under a quilt she'd made years ago. The smell of lavender drifting from the pillowcase. Outside, rain tapped against the windows. But inside, It was quiet and warm. I didn't know what would come next. But I knew this. I wasn't alone anymore. The morning after I moved into Grandma Evelyn's house, I woke to the smell of coffee and cinnamon toast. Sunlight streamed through the lace curtains in her kitchen, catching the steam rising from her mug. She was already dressed, her hair pinned neatly, the way she always wore it when she had something important to say. "Sit down, sweetheart," she told me, sliding a plate toward me. "We have something to discuss." Oh, I was still groggy, but I could feel the weight in her tone. She reached into her purse and pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope. When she placed it in front of me, I hesitated. "What's this?" "Open it," she said simply. Inside were 2 sets of documents. One was a deed to her small but paid-off house. In the other, a bank statement from a savings account I didn't even know existed. My name was on both. I blinked here, confused. "Grandma, I can't." "You can," she interrupted gently. "And you will? Just in case they try something." The they was clear. She didn't have to say my parents' names. I felt my throat tighten. The last time someone had handed me anything valuable, it had always come with strings attached. A reminder of what I owed in return. But this wasn't a bribe. It was a shield. "Why?" I asked finally, my voice barely above a whisper. Her eyes softened, but there was steel underneath. "Because I've watched how they've treated you. And I've also watched how strong you've become, in spite of it. I'm not going to wait for the day they push you into a corner again. I want you to have something they can't take from you." I looked down at the papers. The official stamps and signatures. The numbers on the statement. It felt surreal. I'd been counting quarters for coffee just the night before. "But what if they try to fight this?" I asked, the old fear rising up. "Then we'll fight back," she said without hesitation. "Together." I didn't know whether to cry or laugh. In my world, people didn't give without taking. Yet here was Evelyn, preparing for a battle I hadn't even seen coming. We spent the rest of the morning going through the paperwork. She explained everything in clear detail, how the savings account had been growing for years, how the house had been in her name alone since my grandfather passed, and how all the documents were legally binding. "You've been planning this for a while," I said slowly. Realizing the depth of her foresight, she smiled, a little sly. "Let's just say I've been paying attention." And that night, lying in the guest room under the same quilt as before, I stared at the ceiling. My parents didn't know yet, but when they found out, they'd see it as betrayal. And if Evelyn was right, they wouldn't just be angry, they'd try to take it away. I wasn't sure what scared me more, the fight ahead, or the fact that for the first time in my life, I had something worth fighting for. It started with a thick envelope that arrived one rainy afternoon. I found it in the mailbox, already damp around the edges. Inside was a neatly typed letter from a law firm I didn't recognize. My hands shook as I read the first line. "This office represents Mr. and Mrs. Carter in the matter of financial exploitation of the elderly." I didn't need to finish reading to know what it meant. My parents were suing Evelyn. She didn't flinch when I showed her the letter. "I told you they'd try something," she said, setting it down beside her teacup. Her voice was calm, but I caught the slightest tightening around her eyes. "They're accusing you of stealing," I said, my throat dry. "They're accusing me of being in control of my own decisions," she replied. "And they don't like it." The next morning we were sitting in a wood-paneled office across from a man named David Grant, a lawyer Evelyn had used years ago. He had silver hair, sharp eyes, and the kind of quiet presence that made you want to listen. "I've seen cases like this," David said, flipping through the papers. "It's ugly, but it's winnable. The key will be proving that all transfers were voluntary and well documented." "Oh," I leaned forward. "They'll lie. They'll say I manipulated her. Or, they can say whatever they want. David cut in. But the court looks at evidence, not drama. I'll wit. The days that followed were a blur of signatures, notarized statements, and bank records. Evelyn was meticulous, handing over every receipt, every transfer confirmation. David smiled when he saw her files. You're more organized than most accountants I know. Oh, when? Still. The closer the court date got, the tighter my chest felt. My parents weren't just trying to hurt Evelyn, they were trying to paint me as some scheming parasite. At night, I lay awake imagining my mother's voice, dripping with disdain, my father's cold stare, and the way they'd twist every word. One evening, as we sat at Evelyn's kitchen table with stacks of papers between us, I finally asked the question that had been eating at me. What if we lose? She looked up from her reading glasses, her gaze steady. Then we start again. But Hannah, I've lived a long life. I know the difference between love and control. What they're doing isn't love, and I won't let them win on a lie. And survive. The next morning, David called to go over our witness list. Evelyn's neighbor, her church friend, even her doctor would testify that she was fully capable of making her own financial decisions. It was strange hearing other people talk about her independence, like it was a weapon in our arsenal. By the end of that week, our evidence file was so thick, David joked, we'd need a separate suitcase just to carry it into court. I didn't laugh. I could already feel the storm brewing. And I knew the real fight was only days away. The morning of the trial, the courthouse smelled faintly of coffee and old paper. I sat beside Evelyn at the plaintiff's table, my palm slick against my skirt. Across the aisle, my parents sat with their attorney, a man in an expensive suit who kept whispering in my father's ear. My mother didn't look at me once, but when her eyes did sweep my way, the disdain in them felt like a blade. The judge entered, and we all rose. My parents' lawyer began with an opening statement that painted me as a manipulative granddaughter who had inserted herself into an elderly woman's life for financial gain. He spoke about suspicious asset transfers and a concerning shift in family dynamics. I watched my father nod along like every word was gospel. When it was our turn, David stood with a quiet confidence. Your Honor, what we have here is not exploitation, but a family dispute rooted in resentment and control. Every cent misses. Evelyn Hayes' transferred was voluntary, documented, and in her best interest. The evidence will show exactly that. The first witness was Evelyn's neighbor, Mrs. Collins, who testified about seeing us together nearly every day. She takes care of her grandmother, she told the court. And Evelyn's been clear for years about wanting Hannah to have certain things. My mother scoffed loudly, earning a sharp glance from the judge. Next came Evelyn's doctor, who confirmed she was mentally sharp and fully capable of making her own financial decisions. Then David presented the paperwork pages of bank statements, notarized letters, receipts, and even the will Evelyn had signed years before any of this began. I glanced at my parents when David laid the files neatly on the judge's bench. My father's jaw twitched. My mother's lips pressed into a hard line. When Evelyn took the stand, she spoke plainly. I gave those things to Hannah because she's earned my trust. She has never once asked me for a penny. If anything, she's given me more her time, her care, her loyalty than anyone else in this room. She didn't have to look toward my parents for everyone to know who she meant. Their attorney tried to rattle her, suggesting I'd manipulated her emotions, but Evelyn only smiled faintly. You can't manipulate someone into knowing the truth, she said. By the time closing arguments rolled around, the air in the courtroom felt different, heavier. But not with fear, with certainty. The judge reviewed the evidence quietly, then looked up and delivered the ruling. Based on the clear documentation and credible testimony, the court finds in favor of the defendants. Mrs. Evelyn Hayes and Miss Hannah Carter. However, it was over. My parents didn't speak to me as they left. My father's face was stone. My mother's pale with anger. I felt no joy in their defeat, just relief that the truth had survived. Outside, Evelyn handed me a folded document. Medical power of attorney. She said, "You're the only one I trust to speak for me if I can't." Ho. I took her hand. My voice low. "Thank you." Ho. She smiled. Her eyes warm. It wasn't revenge. It was justice and trust. Ho. Winning the case didn't magically fix everything, but it did clear the path. I could finally look ahead without the constant shadow of what my parents might do next. That summer, I applied to every scholarship program I could find, often staying up past midnight in Evelyn's kitchen, hunched over her old typewriter because she swore it helped me think better. I wrote essays about resilience, about what it means to rebuild your life when the foundation crumbles. When the acceptance letter came, I almost didn't believe it. A full scholarship to the University of Brookhaven, a prestigious design program in the city. I stood in the living room, letter trembling in my hands, while Evelyn beamed like she'd just watched me win an Olympic medal. Moving to the city was a shock. The pace was relentless. The streets buzzing at all hours. The air thick with ambition and coffee. I shared a tiny apartment with 2 other students, sleeping in a room no bigger than the walk-in closet I used to have as a kid. But it was mine. And that mattered more than space or comfort. Classes were intense. My professors didn't care about excuses. Only results. I learned to run on little sleep and sheer determination. Spending long hours in the studio, perfecting models, layouts, and presentation boards. On weekends, I took on freelance projects, tiny jobs designing cafe, reimagining living rooms for small-town clients who found me through word of mouth. Evelyn called every Sunday evening. She never asked if I was tired. She knew I was, but she always asked what I was proud of that week. That simple question pushed me to keep producing something worth telling her about. 4 years later, I stood on the stage in my cap and gown, hearing my name announced with summa cum laude attached. The applause was loud, but all I heard was Evelyn's whistle, sharp, proud, unmistakable from the back row. With my degree in hand, I decided not to join a big firm. I wanted to build something of my own. I took out a small business loan, leased a modest office in a renovated warehouse district, and launched Carter Interiors. My first clients were a mix of friends, referrals, and small businesses willing to take a chance on someone hungry and full of ideas. It wasn't easy. There were months when I barely covered rent for the office, when I stayed up until dawn revising proposals, just to keep the lights on. But then there were moments, the kind that made it all worth it, like the first time a client hugged me after seeing their finished space, or the afternoon I pitched a major corporate redesign to a boardroom full of skeptics and left with the contract in hand. Standing in that room, laser pointer in hand, my designs displayed on the massive screen behind me, I felt a spark. Not just the satisfaction of winning a client, but the deep, rooted confidence that I was exactly where I was meant to be. I could see the vision clearly, how the space would transform, how people would live and work differently because of what I created. That's when I realized success wasn't about proving my parents wrong anymore. It was about proving to myself that I could build something solid from nothing. And in that moment, with the city skyline glowing through the conference room windows, I knew I'd done just that. It was a crisp autumn afternoon when I finally convinced Evelyn to take the day off and come with me to the lake. She'd been hesitant at first, mumbling something about too much work to do at the house. But I knew the truth. She simply didn't like to be fussed over. Still, I managed to lure her with the promise of a picnic and the excuse that I needed her opinion on a new project nearby. The lake shimmered under a pale golden sun, the kind of light that makes the water look like it's been dusted with diamonds. We strolled slowly along the path, her hand hooked in the crook of my arm, her pace steady but unhurried. The air smelled faintly of pine and wood smoke from cabins along the shore. I started telling her about my latest project, a high-rise condominium lobby renovation. The client wanted something bold, but not cold, modern, but still warm and inviting. As I described my vision, Evelyn tilted her head the way she always did when she was picturing something in her mind. She didn't interrupt, didn't offer advice right away. I just let me talk, until the excitement in my voice carried me to the end. "You've built a beautiful life, darling," she finally said, her eyes on the rippling water rather than on me. For a moment, I didn't respond. My throat felt tight in that way. It does when you're holding back more than you can say. Because she wasn't just talking about my career, or my apartment in the city, or the projects I'd taken on. She was talking about the life I'd built from the ashes, one where I could stand on my own feet, make my own choices, and surround myself with people who wanted me to succeed. I not see me fail. We found a bench under an old maple tree, its leaves a patchwork of fire and gold. I unpacked the picnic basket sandwiches, apples, her favorite oatmeal cookies, and she laughed when she saw I'd packed a small thermos of the spiced tea she loved. We ate in companionable silence, watching a group of children skip stones across the water. Every so often, she'd point out a bird or a boat in the distance, her voice soft but steady. When the wind picked up, I draped my scarf over her shoulders, pretending it was about the chill, though in truth it was about the comfort of knowing she was warm. She smiled at me then. A small, knowing smile. The kind that told me she understood more than I said out loud. "I hope you know," she said after a long pause, "that I never doubted you. Not once. Even when the world seemed determined to crush you. I wanted to tell her that I knew. That her faith in me had been the thing that kept me going on nights when I thought I couldn't do it anymore. Instead, I just squeezed her hand and let the moment settle between us. Quiet and solid. As the sun dipped lower, we started back toward the car. The lake reflected the fading light, the air cooling with each step. I realized then that this easy companionship, this steady, unwavering presence was what real family felt like. It wasn't bound by blood or dictated by obligation. It was chosen, nurtured, and fiercely protected. And in that moment, walking arm in arm with Evelyn, I knew I had found my home. The years after that day at the lake seemed to pass in the quiet rhythm of shared routines and steady affection. My business flourished. But my proudest moments were still the simple ones, sharing dinner with Evelyn, listening to her stories about the world as it used to be, watching her eyes light up when I brought home fresh flowers, just because she became the center of my true home. No matter where we were. It was a rainy morning when I realized something had shifted. Evelyn's hands, once steady, even in her late years, trembled slightly as she lifted her teacup. She brushed it off with a joke about getting old, but I saw the fatigue in her eyes. From that day forward, I became more than her companion, I became her caretaker. I drove her to appointments, cooked her meals, and learned every small habit that brought her comfort. It was work, yes, but never a burden. One winter night, the snow falling thick outside the window, she called me into her room. Her voice was soft, almost fragile, and she asked me to sit beside her. I took her hand, feeling its familiar warmth. She smiled, still that same knowing smile from the lake, and told me she was proud of me. Proud of the life I had built. Proud of the woman I had become. "I don't think I have much time left, darling," she whispered. I tried to smile back, but my voice caught in my throat. I told her I wasn't ready to let her go. And she, ever gentle, said that was the point of a good goodbye. "You never really are." In the early hours of the morning, with the storm quiet outside. Evelyn took her last breath in my arms. There was no drama, no fear, just a peaceful stillness that filled the room. I held her a long time after, memorizing the weight of her hand in mine, the way her face seemed softened by rest. The months that followed were strange, both full and hollow at the same time. I poured myself into my work, but I also let myself live, really live in ways Evelyn would have wanted. I traveled. I laughed more. I even learned to bake her oatmeal cookies, though mine never quite matched hers. It was during a charity event for elderly care, a cause I took on in her honor, that I met Michael. He wasn't loud or flashy, just steady, kind, and deeply present. Over time, his presence became another kind of home for me. He didn't try to replace Evelyn. No one could, but he stood beside me with the same quiet loyalty. Looking back now, I understand what Evelyn taught me without ever saying it outright. Real family isn't always blood. It's the ones who choose to stand by you, no matter what. And if you're lucky, you get to spend your life standing by them, too.